All right, we are live. Welcome everyone who is watching and who will be watching later. Thank you again for coming. This is the Gridiron Survivor Project Group. Today, we have presentations for Karina and Ryan about Web Accessibility Part 2. And Ryan's going to be speaking about Prettier. Um, but again, this project, it's a project that we wanted to put together to allow these individuals to get a real feel of working for a client, but also going through a corporate process, a process that includes planning, code reviews, mentorship, and all the above. Hoping that this will be kind of a way for them to improve and get better without having to go and work on a day-to-day job, but giving them that experience so that they can um, set themselves apart from the other individuals that are potentially looking for jobs. So one thing that I wanted to do was thank our sponsors. We have sponsors for this project, and today we're going to start with AppWrite. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about AppWrite?
Absolutely. So AppWrite is an open source community friendly platform that lets you build any application at any scale and creates user logins, databases, and stores your files. And if you didn't catch our previous Gridiron presentation, which I highly recommend you do after watching this presentation, AppWrite officially released version 1.5, which allows server side rendering, messaging, updated runtimes, and all the new features that come along with it. Thank you, AppWrite, for sponsoring us.
Sweet, thank you, Richard. And they have a free forever plan too, right?
They have
Yes.
yes, they do.
Oh, very cool.
Compared to some other people out there,
No names, no names. We love everybody.
everybody.
All right, moving on to our next sponsor, Front End Mentor. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about Front End Mentor and what they offer?
Yeah, hey everyone. First of all, thank you, Front End Mentor, for sponsoring us. I remember when Front End Mentor first came out and started, and I thought this is pretty neat. And since then, they've just continued to grow, and it is a great tool for those of you looking to learn from nothing or just increase your skills on front end work. So it'll give you challenges and things to recreate, which is great. And now they have a new feature, like a path feature, where they'll just help you along the way and give you that structure that a lot of self-taught devs don't have. It's something I know I wish I had when I was first starting. So I definitely encourage you all to check it out if you're looking to step up your CSS game.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you for that, Ryan. I know that guided course is something that a lot of individuals need and want. We can learn as much as we can on our own, but having a guide is always helpful. All right, and then our last sponsor is Pastel. Chris, can you tell us
Yes,
about Pastel?
thank you, Pastel, for sponsoring us. Pastel is a organization. It's an online app that you can use to create comments on your web apps and mobile views and desktop views very quickly, very easily. Provide comments, and when you click on the comments, it highlights the different sections that you're in. When Shashi showed me this when he did my portfolio review, I was insanely impressed. I was blown away, and I'm really excited to be using Pastel as part of the Gridiron Survivor app that we are making here and on other projects, especially when working with freelance clients or other devs for feedback. So thank you, Pastel, again for your sponsorship.
Awesome. I think that goes a long way with collaboration too, right? If
Mhm.
I'm saying, "Hey, Chris, this button doesn't look good," you're gonna say, "What button?" But Pastel, I can click on that button, and when you click on that comment, it shows you exactly which one I'm talking about.
Yep.
So it's pretty cool stuff. Awesome. Thank you, sponsors. And now wanted to move on to our presentations. We only have two today. And then after that, we'll just have some conversations about tasks that we're building and a next meeting that's coming up as well. But up first, we have Ryan. Ryan is going to speak to us about Prettier.
Yes, thank you, Shashi. Prettier. Last week we heard from Chris on linting and why it's important. Prettier, I think, is also important because we're going to learn what it is, what it does, and why we should use it. So in the name, it kind of just makes your code prettier. It makes it better to look at, but it also has some practical uses as well. So let's just start going through it. It's a prettier, it's an extension for your text editor that reformats your code. You can do this on save, on build. I prefer on save. So think if you just write a mess of code, it will then, based on the rules that you give it, reformat your code into a more legible code, as well as something that teams like the Gridiron Survivor project we can use to make sure that our code reads the same across the board. And this is going to save time in a few different ways. So why reformat your code? It allows individuals to contribute to a project but present the work in a consistent and uniform manner. Just like I said with those of us on the Gridiron project, we're coming from different backgrounds. This is the first time most of us have worked on a team, and when it comes time for code reviews, we want to make sure that we are not spending so much time on the format of our code and not spending time trying to read the code. Formatting code is something that I did previously manually, and it is a nightmare. Before I knew Prettier existed, this was way back in the early days of me learning. I can't recommend it enough. Like I said, it just makes things easier. And when you're browsing your own code, even in your text editor, it just makes life way easier. Things start to follow a format, and you just get used to it. So I really, really enjoy working with it. All right. So what are our requirements? So you just need a compatible text editor and a language, and a ton of them are supported. So the picture's a little small here, but it supports a slew of languages. I mean, if you find one that's not supported, I'd be surprised. And the text editors as well. I mean, it lists Atom, which is depreciated now, but that's what I started with. But obviously Sublime, Vim, VS Code, WebStorm by JetBrains. So a lot of the popular ones, and even Nova, which I know I think it's still in beta or early access for Mac. So they are supported on brand new items. They're supported on more mature platforms. There's no excuse not to be using something like Prettier, in my opinion. So the other requirement is, at least on a team, in my opinion, is sharing the Prettier config file, and that will ensure that everyone has the same tools over and over. So yeah, here, actually, thank you for making it a little bit bigger. You could just see the list there, and this is straight on their website, on their homepage. I don't know. It just, again, not using it doesn't make sense, in my opinion.
So let me ask you this: you're saying that it should be required, but can you think of a scenario where you may not need it or may not want to use it?
I think if someone is really selective on how they want things formatted, as for a practical use as to why it would be needed or wanted, I can't think of one just yet. I don't think I can get out of the way.
What if it was a project that you were the only one working on it, and you wanted to move fast, and you wanted to build a quick like MVP or POC or something?
Okay. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, would you forego using Prettier so you can get this like just out of there quickly up there, or would you still lean on using Prettier so that it can format your code and everything?
Yeah, because it takes no time, I would just have it anyway. So for me, again, I have it format whenever I save my code, and with Live Preview or Astro or whatever framework you're using that has fast reloads and refreshes, it instantly formats your code for you. So again, like I said, there's no reason to not use it if speed is your worry, in my opinion.
Okay. I would play devil's advocate, and I would say that it depends. If you're building, if you're tasked to build a POC or something, right, you need to move fast. It does take no time because if you have the config, but if you have to configure it, it will take time. And then if you don't have like a compiler or anything, then it doesn't work, right? So you can forego it, but if it's like something where you're going to build and you're not going to come back to, I think it's totally fine not to do it, because if it's something solo and you're just trying to get it through, okay, let me answer the question. I want to answer it. On a team base, like we have, right? We have 11 members. Do you think that it's good for us to use Prettier as a team?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it could save time in code reviews and pull request reviews, right? Because everyone's going to be it'll all look the same. It's just less time to digest. You think about changing your code editor theme. It can kind of mess with how quickly you think and work. And this would be the same way if you're just changing. For example, if you have an HTML element with 3 different attributes, you could format this to have them all in line. Or like me, I like to have it each one on a line when they get past a certain width, right? And so that's just one way that increases the legibility of your code. But also with 11 team members, everyone does things differently, right? And so this is just one more of the one more way I think it could be well done. Well done, I should say. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep, keep going.
Yeah, so we have it all, so we might as well use it. So we already started talking about the use cases for Prettier. Let's just go into a few of them. I wrote them down here. These 3 are pretty straightforward. Creating and maintaining a code style guide. Again, very important, I think, when you're working on a larger team. We just kind of touched on all of that. Clean up existing code into one coherent, consistent, and uniform code base. Let's say you didn't use Prettier before. Like Shashi just mentioned, you're trying to get something out quick, no matter what. You get it done, you get the MVP out there, or proof of concept even. You want to go back and just clean it up. You can install Prettier, whether it's with a existing config file that you have, or you can take the time to write your own. But no matter what, it'll make the code more legible then. If you're going to bring on more team members or make it open source or open to the public, just not a bad thing to do. You can reduce syntax-related issues, allowing the developer to focus on larger problems and goals. So again, this is a big perk in my opinion. It's just less time that you're spending doing other things. Manually formatting code is a lot of work, and I'm sure those of you that started way back when you use like Notepad plus or whatever it was called, I wouldn't imagine this had it built in. I don't know for a fact, but it just cleans up those syntax-related issues. Even things like, even though we don't need them anymore, semicolons in JavaScript, or for example, different quotes in your HTML, or you can, or JavaScript for the example, you can tell it to use single or double quotes all the time, and if it finds an inconsistency, it will fix that for you based on the rules that you've set up. Team setting is something that we also started touching on. So again, as a team, it removes any opinions of those individual contributors. So everyone can have a part in it and not feel like they're slowing the team down. And it's just one less thing to spend time and energy on. Shashi, I'm sure you're going to be busy with all the code reviews that you'll be doing with us. And I'm sure you're going to appreciate less time and energy spent on things. And lastly, for us and a lot of people these days using Tailwind, there's a fantastic plugin. And I think, Chris, you touched on this last week. There's a Prettier plugin for Tailwind CSS, and I think it's mandatory, to be honest, for Tailwind. It does a couple of things. Number one, it makes sure that their styles are being written in the same order across the board. It does so by looking at the 3 layers of Tailwind and putting them in that explicit order. And this helps ensure that there's no unintentional styling issues, no overwrites, things like that. And again, that is something that it formats on save because it's part of Prettier, again, for me. And you see it shift everything around as you're writing your styles. It's a really, really powerful plugin that is, again, something that I highly recommend for our team that we have mandatory for everyone.
So I have a question for you. Let me switch to this view. With Prettier, do you have to do this of one file at a time?
You mean have it formatted on save?
Mm-hmm. Or just have it format? Yeah.
That I don't know because I've only used it format on save.
Okay.
I would imagine I could look into it, but I would imagine there's got to be a way to do it for your entire code base. But with that, I would want to review it for sure.
There definitely is. You definitely can. So you can put it in your package JSON script and just do it Prettier, and it just goes through all the files without having to do it on save. So it's just a different way of going through it. And then we can even put it into different pipelines so that to ensure all code is sanitized that way. So even if, someone doesn't have it configured the right way, you can do that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Chris is right. I asked these questions so that you answer them for me. I was going to tell you if nobody knew that I was going to tell you to go look it up, but yes, you can. Same thing with linting. There's scripts that you can run that will do it to your whole entire file. The only downfall is that if you build your application, you didn't have Prettier installed, and then you run it, it will touch every single file and make every adjustment, and then your PR will look like it touched everything.
Yep.
Good and bad. Moving forward, it's nice and conform now, but then initially the look and feel is, if I did it, it means that I created I was the last one to touch the file. So if there's like a conflict or a bug in that code, when you look at the history, I'll be the last one who touched it. And you'll come to me and say, hey, you wrote this code. What happened here? And I'll be like, I didn't write that. I just formatted it. Right. That's a downfall. But
Yeah.
But definitely something that is a need and a must-have.
Steve Zero from LinkedIn is just asking if it's able to exclude a format on save. Yes. It's not the default one, right? Or you can change the default action, I believe.
Yeah, in your configs, you can say extension files. You can say specific file to ignore, kind of like any like linter as well. You can have a wildcard on certain files, certain names, and all. There's a bunch of ways to do it. Obviously, you can just do the whole application, which makes it easier, but you can also exclude things too.
And then Braden says, could use a script to run a stage files only. And that's true. You could only run it on stage files. And Ryan, do you have more slides?
I have a couple more, yeah.
All right. I
And
want
a
to see what
demo.
you get to before I talk about anything. But cool.
Yeah. So real quick, Prettier actually has a great little tool on their website.
Okay. You want me to switch to the other
Yeah, if
view
you
then?
don't mind. Yeah.
Okay.
And so this basically just lets you see it in action. So here I just grabbed some HTML straight from one of my projects. And so left side is the raw and right side is the formatted one, I believe. So here we have some things like I was mentioning. We have the single quote options, no bracket spacing. Things that, again, you might just prefer when you're writing your code, or whoever's doing the code reviews might prefer. Even tab width sizes, you can see as I'm increasing it, the right side is going up. I think it's a bit much, but I mean the size of it. But again, just for that, and you can exclusively use tabs over spaces. We won't get into that debate, but it's just an option here as well. We come down to the JavaScript again. We don't have any JS here, but you can see that it also takes some of these into account. So, I mean, there's not much here in the demo to show, but you could just see that, and not all of it was working, by the way, when I tested it. Like the single quote here, it's not changing it, but I know it works in my editor, that's for sure.
That one might be not allowing single quotes.
Oh, yeah, that's possible too.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. So, like I said, the width of the text as well is something that I like to take into account. If you keep reducing this, you'll see the line here is moving, and this is getting more and more truncated. And that could be just help for legibility. Again, too short is going to be much more difficult to read, but too long is going to be more difficult. This is why you also use things to make sure your text on your website is not too wide, right? And it's all in the sake of uniformity and I think legibility and just making sure everything's consistent. Any
Ryan,
questions on this demo? Yes.
I got a question. So,
Yeah.
is there a way that we could all use the same configuration? Because you can have different tab spaces. You can have different, how do we ensure that everyone is on the same Prettier configuration, I guess you could say?
Yeah, so there's a file that you make when you're using Prettier in a project called the Prettier config file, and that is where you can start establishing your rules. And that's what I would use for our team is we decide on the rules that we want, and one person or a team, several people are responsible for making sure that it is consistent. And then when people pull the pull the code onto their computer for local work, then they should also have that Prettier config file, and that will ensure that we're all on the same config.
Yeah, so it will work. We have one shared repo. We commit that file there. We pull it in. As you pull it in, and then your IDE reads that file, then everything will be the same. And then we'll do it on save, right? As you save it, then that file will format for you. And then it would format according to the coding styles. Now that leads me to my next question for you, Ryan. Is we're talking about coding styles and stuff like that. Do you have a start for us for this and like commands and stuff and like maybe some rules that we could look at or even an example of what we're looking at so that the team could kind of look at and cohere to a coding practice?
Yeah, so I could write that up for the team for sure. I have a starter that I've been using, and I'll just throw it out there. All the code's public as well, so everyone could see it. More than happy to do that for us. And then you can let me know if you're happy with it or not, right? Because you're reviewing it.
It is not per se up to me; it's up to the team.
Fair enough.
But I would tell you that do that and document it because
Sure.
we want to create a hub for all of our research and all of our decisions for this team. Richard is our documentation expert. He's gonna documentation engineer. He's gonna put all that together and create all the files, and we're gonna throw it onto Storybook where it will have all of our documentation decisions and all that, plus our UI components as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll document that, get that going for you, and send it over.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions from anybody or comments?
I have
think
a
I've got
question.
two more slides before we
Ryan,
wrap
do you
up. Go
happen
ahead.
to know how Prettier interacts with accessibility?
In terms of what aspects of accessibility?
Like, for example, like ARIA tags or ARIA labels, stuff like that.
Yeah, it doesn't write them for you. It just formats your code. If you have them in there as an attribute, like you see on the screen right now, let's just say we had it in one of these link tags, it would just, it would format it however you wanted. Well, it's not injecting anything. Like ESLint will show you where errors are. This is literally just changing the look of your code.
Yeah, formatting the code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. We do have a question from our very own Mai. Will Prettier and linting exist in the same config file, or will there be two separate config files for the project?
There are two separate ones, right? There's the prettier.config file and then the ESLint file.
Yep, that's right. They're two separate ones because they're looking at different things. Prettier is looking for format. ESLint is looking for the specific, like I talked about last week, the different configurations and the different scripts we're looking at, what errors we want to pull out.
Yeah, and they both just live in the root of your project.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, something that I might be doing actually, if I'm sure a lot of us use VS Code, I'm going to be making a separate profile for Gridiron stuff. So that way, all of the extensions and things that we're using for it are completely separate from my personal work, just because I don't want any conflicts or one thing to affect the other. So just a little tip, if anyone isn't interested, doesn't know how to do that, I can help you through it.
Yeah, I am going to recommend everybody use VS Code. That way we stay conformed and all of our plugins and all this stuff will be easier.
Well,
because
we're not going to use Zed. Come on now. I'm just kidding.
Sorry. Hey, I work at Microsoft. What can I say?
Fair enough.
That way it can be easy and conform because when you use whatever you want and you have a problem, right, it's too hard for us to diagnose what the issue is. When we're all using the same thing, it's a lot easier to move forward together, to have the same issues. We can debug it together and whatnot. So awesome. And Ryan, you said you had 2 more slides, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move to it now.
So this is just a quick summary. Prettier is a code formatter that removes the potential clash for individual contributors' opinions on code styling. Again, something we just talked about is making sure everything is consistent across the board. It also maintains a code style across the code base, making them easier to read and maintain. That's going to be very big for anyone jumping on the project after I'm gone. Hopefully I get a job pretty soon. But that goes for anyone. They could use the same Prettier config file and just jump straight in. It's not to be confused with linters, like I mentioned earlier. Those are used for catching bugs and issues in your code. It's solely focused on code formatting and change the way it looks. And that's all I got. That's my handle if anyone wants to go follow me.
Cool. Thanks,
Shameless plug, Ryan.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
I mean, your name was on the front card, so.
That's true. Hey, Shashi, you know it'd be really cool?
Yeah, what's up?
I would love it if I had a comfy autonomous chair to sit in. I'm just saying.
Oh man, I
Oh.
wish I had an autonomous chair and a standing table that I can go up and down because
My
back
back
is
has been killing me sitting at this table right
my
here.
back.
And what I would give to
Oh,
stand right now
I
at the
know,
old age of
right?
42. So I'm just saying that would be pretty cool
Um,
if
That would be
autonomous,
pretty cool.
Yeah, it
because
would.
autonomous is autonomously awesome.
We shall see. We shall see. But thank you, Ryan.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions or comments for Ryan from anybody?
Oh, Steve in chat is asking.
Okay.
Let's say
There you go.
I clone a repo for a team project and they have a format they follow, but my Prettier overrides that format as I save. So that's the prettier.config file that we mentioned. And again, you might have missed it. If they don't have one, then they are not all sticking to the same configuration. And if they don't have one, then I highly encourage you to either ask for one or work on building one with whoever may be in charge, because that's the only way you'll all be consistent.
Yeah, I agree. Because if they don't have one, you have one, then you're going to be off, and they will eventually be formatted off as well. And then you just have this craziness. And then once you start to do it as a team, then every file is now changed, and it gets messy.
Yeah, exactly right. I could save on one computer, Shashi could save on another, and the code looks completely different. And then your commits and PRs look like a mess. So cool. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan, for
Great
sharing
job, Ryan.
us about
Thank
Prettier.
you. Appreciate it.
All right. So next we have Karina. Karina presented about web accessibility last time, but because she had so much information, we split it up into two parts. No, it's totally okay. And so today we're going to finish up and have her go with her part two.
Oh, I was just testing my slides just to be sure. Hi, everyone. So last week we touched on what is accessibility, why it's important, both from a human rights point of view and business point of view. We looked at how different users with disabilities interact with the web. And then we started talking about how accessibility works behind the scene. And we covered the accessibility tree. And today's time for the accessible name. And then at the end, we'll have a look at WCAG, what does it mean WCAG, and what does it mean for us that we want to be WCAG 2.2 compliant. Okay, so the browser computes the accessible name for certain elements that must have one. And that is, headings, links, buttons, all form fields. And it follows a certain set of rules, but it depends on us to give it to feed the right information. If we don't give it the right information, there's going to be no name for these elements. And it's really important. I think I have this on the second. Let's see. I'm looking for, no. Okay, I must have left out the example we looked at last week was a LinkedIn icon wrapped in A tags. Great for the sighted user to realize, that link leads to LinkedIn, but not so great for the screen reader user or for the voice user who cannot activate the link since it doesn't have a name. Okay, so it also has to be descriptive enough, especially for the screen reader user, because it might say, read more. There's a link that says read more. Read more what? So, the name has to be there and it has to be descriptive enough. So I want us to actually have a look. I don't know, Shashi, if this is something that you can make larger, next few slides. Yes, because how do we find the accessibility tree and how do we find the accessible name in the DOM? So here I'm in the in DevTools, the Elements view, and if you look at the bottom, there's a panel. This is where usually you would have styles selected. So I clicked on accessibility, and what you see on the white background is the top of the accessibility tree of a page. And you check that button, that checkbox that I have circled in red. And if you do that, you're still in the elements view. So you're still viewing the DOM, but notice at the top right, there's a little accessibility icon. And that's a button that allows me to toggle between the DOM view and the accessibility tree view. So if I press that icon, I notice that I also have a node highlighted, because I want to see how that node looks in the accessibility tree. Okay, so now I have the full accessibility tree. I took a screenshot of a top part, but just like you're in the DOM, you can scroll up and down to see everything. So my link is showing up as a node with the role link. The name is skip to content. So what you see in between those quotation mark, that's the accessible name that the browser computed for the skip link. And I know it's coming from the text in between the tags of the link. It says static text, skip to content. So that kind of tells you where it's coming from. But I have another way to actually see more details in case it wasn't computed based on the visible text. So now I'm still in accessibility tree view, but I'm at the bottom, that bottom panel, and I highlighted, it says name, skip to content, and underneath it's showing me a list of attributes that the browser is looking for. Okay, it's ARIA label by, not specified, meaning I didn't give it any information with that attribute. ARIA label, not specified. Content, so skip to content. It's different than static text, because content is also going to be looking at what's in between the tags, but may be visually hidden. Okay, so there's a little bit of discrepancy here in the naming. And also there's an attribute title that at least theoretically can be used to compute the name, but it's not recommended. Okay, we can go back to the regular view, but it's fine. This one is fine for me as well. So how does the browser compute? What is it looking for? Okay, first of all, it's looking at, is there text between the tags? That's what we call visible text, or if it's an input, that's a label. And if there's nothing else available, the name is not going to be computed from the visible text. It's considered the best because it works equally well for all users, with the one caveat that we have to make sure it's descriptive enough for screen reader user. One thing that we don't often think about when we create content is how is it going to be available to like international users, those that have to have the content translated. So visible text works great with auto translation, for example, which is part of internationalizing our content. There's more features, but I'm just mentioning auto translation right now. The second best is ARIA label by. If you remember, when we look at the accessibility tree, that was actually at the top. It supersedes everything, including the visible text. It's second best under circumstances. You can't always use it. So notice what I'm doing here. Actually, this is something that I'm working on my site. I have a long article, and I thought I would create a table of contents. Okay, and I decided to wrap that section, table of contents, in a landmark. So I'm using nav tags. Because every page on my site, or it's already using navigation for the primary navigation, I'm required to give a name to this second navigation landmark. And I can do it, I can give it the name by referencing text that's already available. In this case, it's actually the heading that I'm using for this section. So I'm telling the browser, saying, hey, use the table of contents, use the element with ID, also table of contents. And I'm telling this by using ARIA label by. So ARIA label by equals the ID of the element whose text I want to use. So when a screen reader user lens, let's say they tab through the links and they get to the first link in my table of contents. Could be maybe introduction, okay? So it's announced as navigation landmark, table of contents. So it's giving it what's the name, and it's going to say introduction link. So they are aware where they are. I don't have to use nav. Actually, I'm not sure that I'm going to stick with the nav. I could have used an aside. That's a landmark on its own, and it's announced as complementary landmark. And if that was the only aside on my page, I wouldn't have to use aria label by. And then I could also use section. I know if anyone ever wonder why we have section tags, because they kind of function more or less like a div. If you use aria label by, or actually you can also use aria label to give it a name, then they become a region, and it's announced to the user, to the screen reader user, as a region. And you might want to do that sometimes if you have, you have your main content. You must have a main landmark on your page. And maybe you want to have a special section that it's not really an aside, and you want to draw the user attention to it. And then you can use section and then aria label by. Maybe you can use the heading of that section to name the actual landmark, or you could use a aria label. Okay, I think I mentioned it has the highest priority. Just make sure it's the highest priority among all the other options. So for example, if you have visible text and then you have aria label by, the visible text is not going to be read as the accessible name. And the screen reader user is going to hear only what you put as the string for the aria label by. Okay. If you cannot use aria label by, and the only point of using it if you want to reference text on the page. So if you don't have that, then the second best option is visually hidden text. So here we have a button. It's closing a modal or a form maybe. I'm using an image. I add text, close menu. I don't want the text to show up on the screen, so I'm going to visually hide that with CSS. Two problems with this approach. So anything other than visible text and maybe aria label by has some downsides, okay? It's not great for voice users because they don't know what you hid in that span. Okay, it's great for screen reader users. It's going to be announced with one caveat, which I'm going to mention. But the voice user, they kind of have to guess what the name of that element is. I said that there's a caveat for screen reader users. We have to be careful with the CSS. There's one attribute, I'm blanking right, white space. It should have a value or no wrap. Without it, sometimes, not always, sometimes the screen reader might read the content letter by letter. So just that's one thing we have to be careful. And, that's one of the reasons this is, on the same par with the visible text. Just interrupt me at any time if you have questions.
I do have a question, Corina. I know you're talking about HTML tags and stuff like that, and there's this lingo that goes around that building semantic HTML.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say building semantic HTML or using it not only helps organize your layout, but it's also good for accessibility?
Yes, I touched a little bit on this last week, but so happy that you asked that because it's really important. So if I see nav tag, if I see header, it as a developer, it gives me an idea about what the content between those tags is. So it helps me. So it's semantic for me as a developer, but it's semantic for the assistive tech users because there's built-in roles in semantic HTML tags. They're being announced to the user of assistive technologies. Okay, so if let's say I'm looking at this button, and instead of using a button before HTML5, a lot of developers used to do that. I'm going to use a div. that's a div until I add a lot of other stuff to it. I have to add role button. I have to add tab index equals 0, so it's focusable. I need to add event handler because this button you see on the screen, I could activate it by pressing the enter key. I could activate it by pressing the space bar. I can't do that with the div unless I add event handlers on key up, on key down, and so forth.
So you're telling me that I should not build everything with divs?
No. What I started doing? Everyone that I know, and they started getting jobs, and it's like a professional defect now because like, oh, let me see what company you're working for, and immediately test for accessibility. So now I'm emailing my friends or acquaintances and say, hey, I noticed this on your company's site is not accessible. Tell them, and maybe you're earning some points. You don't have to say it's coming from me. It's like kind of, and so many are divs. And then they don't add, so they work on with the mouse. You can click like, so there are buttons made out of divs or links in the navigation, but they haven't even added like the tab index. So I'm tabbing, I'm getting to one, and I'm skipping two, because they're not accessible. These people are going to be sued next year for sure. So that's why I'm reaching out to all my friends. Anyway, I'm going off tangent like I always do. Did I answer your question, Sashi?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much for being detailed with that as well.
I didn't actually, I stopped at this and didn't mention anything. So a button, let's say I'm not adding the visible text, the visually hidden text, yes? So I have the image, I want to use this image. My other option is to add a value for the alt attribute. Now, functions kind of the same as the visually hidden. So the voice user is not going to exactly know what command they should use to activate the button. It's also too verbose. I mean, if extra word means verbose. So this is going to be announced as close menu graphic button. So the graphic comes from the fact that we're using the image. And then the browser is required to announce that there is an image present because it sees the alt that is not empty. So you might say, well, it's just on one word. There's a lot of, if we're not careful, there's a lot of auditory junk that we're feeding the screen reader user. So in this case, I would still say that using visual hidden text, it's better than the alt. And make sure the alt is empty. So the alt has to be there, but it's just equal quotation mark and empty quotation mark, because otherwise it's still going to try to announce that there is an image there. Okay.
So Karina, we do have a question from our audience, from Steve. This is great. I love how you pointed out accessibility as human rights. One question I have is, as I'm developing, how can I test for accessibility, such as activating a on-screen reader or anything else, or anything?
Oh my goodness, that's such a kind of like wide question. I'm going to briefly answer, but I don't know, Shashi, am I allowed to? So I give a link for people to reach me and because I do this kind of work. I meet with the junior developers and help them learn about access, or not even junior, but yes. So NVDA is a open source screen reader. It's really easy to install, and there's a lot of information out there for you to learn how to use it. And I recommend that you do that, and every time you're building a new feature and every time you're adding a new feature, you test with the screen reader. Ideally, you would also have a speech recognition software. If you're using Windows, there's the I'm completely blanking on the Windows one. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work well with my accent. But I know Microsoft bought. I think I'm correct about this. They bought Dragon Naturally, which is the best, and it's paid for speech recognition software. And so you test with that as well. You definitely want to learn about and know how to use the accessibility tree to debug. Yes, it's so much to share about the things that you could do. I'm hoping that was a sufficient enough answer to kind of like get you started. But feel free to reach out via Twitter or LinkedIn, and happy to meet with you and give you more information. Oops, oh, I skipped this one. So title, I'm showing it. I was debating whether I should share this or not because it's listed under the rules that the browser can look at. Is there a value for the title? From what I've been reading, most experts say to avoid it. We use the title to create a tooltip on hover. So let's say I have, I'm using this image, or maybe I have very cryptic text, and I want to give more information to the mouse user about what the link is about. But that information is not available to the keyboard user. So you can still use, if you want to use it, you need to think about it. How am I going to make this available to the keyboard user? Because it's important for you to show it to the mouse user. That means that information has to be there. So it's just not a good idea. Some people say that it's also it doesn't get announced by the screen readers. I haven't experienced that. Like, I tested with that, and for me it was announced. But that doesn't mean anything, because there's so many we have more than one operating system, we have more than one browser, we have more than one screen reader. So you just have to take everything into account. Okay, everyone's favorite, and this is the attribute that experts hate. It's not great for voice users. Again, this is hidden. The content is available only to a screen reader user. The voice user doesn't know what the name is. Problem with internationalization, so it's not guaranteed to be translated by all browsers, and then a few other issues. And it's overused. I even saw the title of an article, which I didn't read, but I planned to, was ARIA label, it's code smell for bad accessibility code. Because it's definitely much easier to use than a visually hidden class, because you don't have to create a CSS, don't have to deal with CSS in a less verbose than a visually hidden class. That's what I used until I learned that visually hidden class is better. Having said all that, I want to share with you this. I don't know if we can make this a little bit bigger. So WebAIM, it's an organization, I think it's attached to the University of Utah. So they do one cool thing every year. They use an automated tool to scan 1 million. So 1 million home pages every year, at least for the past several years. This is from last year. 97 of home pages have accessibility bugs. 97%. It's just I don't know. It's mind-boggling. And look at the issues. Low contrast. There's an automated tool that checks that for you. You don't even have to do anything. You just have to run it, and then obviously you have to change it. Missing alt images, almost 60%. And then the next three, empty links, missing form labels, empty buttons. So these are all elements without an accessible name. So yes, ARIA label is bad, but I would take it any day over nothing. 50% of the home pages, had empty links. When maybe you have an icon inside, so it works great for the sighted user, but not for everybody else. So that means this is not just using incorrectly, it's just not using anything, because you don't know about the accessibility. There are 50, the average number of issues, accessibility issues per page was 50. There's one page with over 100,000 accessibility bugs. I don't even know where from, how many elements, how many components did that page have? Anyway, this is
shocking. I gotta say, it's kind of wild, because I'm so junior, but this is something that I've at least learned, and focused on. So to see 97% of, yeah, like, it's just ridiculous to me.
And it's also the kind of issues. And I mean,
Exactly.
it's true that, this was an automated tool, yes, and it only can, they at best they can catch up to 50%. So there's other issue that maybe were not captured. Like this one doesn't capture if you can tab, like we were just talking with Shashi. If if you have buttons made of divs, that's not necessarily going to be captured here. Or if you have a shopping cart, and as a screen reader user, I need to get to it, I need to open it, and I want to make sure, we need to make sure that the focus is kind of trapped inside until I choose to close the shopping cart. So those are details that you can't sort of capture with an automated tool. And it's shocking because, if I'm looking for a job, they're going to say, we need you to have 5 years of experience. And yet I can fix and all of us can do this, as Ryan, as you're just saying, you can fix this even though you're a junior. So there's this discrepancy about everybody holding their noses up, because they need somebody with, a decade or 5 years of experience, and yet most of the websites are inaccessible. Okay, this was my rant about just, okay, so, yeah, so what I was going to say about this is that, I noticed that most of the pages that had a lot of bugs, they also had a lot of like ARIA attributes, especially ARIA label. So now the conclusion was that, well, that must be a relationship between people not using ARIA correctly. Like, there's a causation. I also think could simply be a correlation. The more complex the page, more likely that you have to use ARIA, because this is where semantic HTML is not enough. So you have to supplement with ARIA. And then also more complex, they're just like, it requires more experience. And if you're not, or if you didn't think much about it, or, you just have more bugs. So they don't have to necessarily be correlated. But again, there's this feeling that, the more ARIA you use, the worse your accessibility is, at least among experts. Okay, finally getting to what Shashi asked me to do, which was kind of an overview on WCAG and, what does it mean to be WCAG 2.2 compliant. And I'm going to say that maybe it's the teacher in me. Like it just didn't feel right to tell you about certain rules and guidelines if I didn't explain what's behind the scene, and not necessarily assuming that you don't know, because a lot of the things probably I covered, I'm sure you know. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we can use the language of accessibility, when we talk about, components and testing, and so much is to say, hey, look at the tree, or look at the name, where is it coming from? And also just to be on the same page and, accept that we can't talk about usability without talking about accessibility. And as we're adding components to our application, always ask the question, how is this going to be used? Or is it working for the user, but not only from the point of view of the, maybe young, sighted, able-bodied mouse user, okay? Because I know we can relate with that. Well, I can't relate with the young one, okay? But I know we can relate to that, but we need to relate to the blind user, we need to relate to the voice user, we need to relate with the people with low or no mobility. And we always have to have them also in our minds as we add new features. Okay, so guidelines. This name is a bit misleading because it's a more, because it makes you think about like just like a bunch of rules, but the structure. Ooh, I think I must have uploaded a previous version. Let me, oopsie. Okay, I'm going to move up and down a little bit because I just realized that maybe when I uploaded in the last minute, I uploaded the previous version, but it's fine. Okay, so we actually have principles. We have 4 principles. then each principle is an umbrella for a number of guidelines, and then each guideline is an umbrella for a bunch of rules that are very specific, and these are the ones that we use to test if something is a site is accessible. So we call those rules success criteria. And I like to call them rules because maybe as a non-native speaker, I have a hard time saying all the time success criteria. Going back through, okay. So the 4 principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable, as a sighted person, when we say perceivable, we often say, oh, I have to be able to see it. Well, yeah, for a sighted person, but for a blind person, it's you perceive it with the senses that are working for you. So that's what perceivable means. We should allow users to be aware, perceive our sight based on the senses that have working for them. They should operate it based on the senses that they have working and based on the assistive technologies that they use. It should be understandable, like the content, but also how to navigate it. I shouldn't need a PhD in computer science to navigate a site. And it should be robust. I can't build just for Chrome. I can not build for an Apple computer just because they're not so great about fixing the accessibility bugs. I have to take into account the existing technologies and the existing browsers. Okay, now I'm going through my, okay. Sorry, but this is one thing that I said about messing up. Okay, so I'm giving you an example, okay? So the principle operable has one guideline called navigable. That means that as a developer and designer, I have to help my user navigate the site, find the content, determine where they are on the page. And I have 2 rules that I need to follow. Well, I need to follow one, and if I want, which is like a minimum level of conformance, focus, not obscured. So notice that it has their level AA. This is actually from WCAG 2.2. So this is very recent. I'll explain in a second what WCAG 2.2 is. This basically tells me that if I have, for example, a button and the keyboard user has to get to that button, and that button has to be in focus. When it's in focus, it shouldn't be hiding behind other elements. And it's kind of like obvious. And I was really surprised when I saw this rule and I heard experts saying, well, we almost never see this as a problem, but it was still added as a rule just in case somebody will try to get away with it. Or maybe sometimes, as you're making your app responsive, you might miss that. So at a certain screen size, maybe that button is hiding behind some sort of a banner or different element. So it's okay to have it covered a little bit by another element as long as that is not completely covered, okay? So you can get away with a little bit of overlap. This is level AA. If you want to reach kind of like the gold standard, which is...
Sorry. I did something. It didn't work. You're back.
I was like looking at the time. Okay, I'm over time. I'm almost done. Okay, I said, they kick me out now. They're not going to let me. Is it working now?
Yep, it should be.
Okay. So under the gold standard, level AAA, then you're not allowed to. So your element that's in focus should be in complete view. Okay, so just to kind of like give you an example about what it means to have the principle, the guideline, and then the rules, the success criterion. Okay, so now I mentioned those 2 levels of conformance. So there's the AA, the AAA, but there's also level A, which is the most basic, like having a language attached to a language attribute on your page, having the title, those are like the most basic level. And then there's the AA, which is the recommended. And most companies, when they say, okay, we want to build accessibly, they have all the rules that are AA in mind. But if you're AA conformant, you also have to have also the A level conformance. This is like, for me, this is still like very confusing. I think there should be just 2. the minimum. So A and AA should be together, and then the highest level, the desirable level. But this is what we have. Okay, I'm trying to figure out where. No. Okay, last slide. If I get to it. Okay, so what does it mean to be WCAG 2.2 conformant? Okay, so right now we live in WCAG 2 world. Before that was WCAG 1 world. So that was in 1999, was the first set of guidelines that we got right after W3C was established like 30 years ago, and soon after they established WAI, Web Accessibility Initiative. You might see WAI-ARIA. So sometimes if you read articles that refer to ARIA, there will be, the ARIA will be prefaced with WAI. I think that's just to kind of like tell you that, this is not HTML. This is a different structure that's helping HTML, because ARIA is not HTML. So it's a set of attributes on their own. Okay, so WCAG 1 was kind of basic, focused mostly on physical disabilities. And then WCAG 2, which happened in 3 stages, it has a little bit of a different structure than WCAG 1. And at each stage, they added more guidelines or more rules or both. So right now we have 13 guidelines. The principles are the same, 13 guidelines and 86 rules. So for us to be WCAG 2.2 compliant, it means that we have to conform to all 3 guidelines and all 86 rules. So it's not that, okay, I have WCAG 2.2 from last year and everything else it's forgotten. No, so every new stage builds on top of the previous stage. So it's not removing the previous stage. It's kind of adding more nuance and more focused rules. 86 criteria, 86 success criteria. If I'm not mistaken, 28 are AAA. So usually, as I mentioned before, if you say that you want to conform to accessibility guidelines, that means WCAG 2. Okay, for us, going to be the latest 2.2, and it's AA. So we'll have to make a decision. I think we can easily conform to some of the AAA.
Yeah, I think that's smart, because if it's not a lot of effort and we're already there, we might as well feature proof it, right? And get it doing, because that's hard. That's one of my goals with you, is to allow you to do that with this project, and to have you be that expert for us. If it wasn't for that, then we would probably just go for A and move forward, But to have someone like you on the team, then we can give you the work and audit us to ensure that we move to AAA as much as possible, if the effort's there or not. And also at the same time, it's a case-by-case basis, right? If it's going to take this amount of work, do we put the work in now, or do we just go with AA and then move forward and then come back, right, in a future phase to make it AAA compliant?
Okay, speaking so this was going to be my last slide, but I'm going to say one more thing, speaking about the future. So there's not going to be a WCAG 2.3 anymore. There's going to be a WCAG 3. And it's predicted to, they've been working at it for a decade now, WCAG 3, because, the technologies have changed. Like when WA started, we weren't talking so much about mobile phones. I don't know, were they mobile phones in 97? Maybe. Definitely not smartphones, yes. So they have to come up with a different paradigm. The goal is going to be the same, accessibility. Most likely the principles are going to be the same. The structure might be slightly different. I definitely know that it's not going to be AA, AAA. It's going to be bronze, silver, gold, because we know what those mean. So it's going to have more significance, hoping that, everybody will maybe strive for the gold. I have to be honest, I haven't looked at that, but we can also keep an eye on that. One thing that I know they might be different from right now, it's the color contrast. A lot of people are very unhappy with the rules, with the math behind, that's calculating. But again, we can make a decision about. We can be somewhere in the middle, like we can conform to what's now, and there's an idea what's coming in the future. Obviously, it's not very detailed, and maybe we can just be in between, so we are also future proof.
This brings up a good question from Steve, who's great at asking questions. Is over engineering a thing when it comes to accessibility?
Shashi, maybe you can answer. It's like, what do people mean by over engineering?
Yeah, so per se, like what we just talked about, right? 3 is not in this. They're still planning it, but if you know of some um, rules that they're already coming up with and it's not there yet, you could over engineer and say, hey, I'm going to accommodate for this rule, even though it's not there yet, right? I'm going to build towards that. And then even though I have this ready for 2.2 or even 2.1, I'm going to future proof it and go further than that and take the extra time to do that.
You know what? It depends now. Like, for example, I remember listening to a podcast about, like, at the beginning of last year, about WCAG 2.2. Now, WCAG 2.2 was due during the pandemic, but we know that, what was like then. So, it got a bit delayed. And, let's say like in January of 2023, they were published, they were made available in October. People kind of had an idea what's in it. There are certain things that they're not sure about it because, this is a consensus organization. So everybody has to agree. There's a lot of compromise, like all the browser or the major, software company are involved. So it's like not an easy to come up with a consensus. But, a year before that, you kind of knew what's in it. So it was fine then. For me, like I was learning about the focus, there's rules about, the focus indicator when an element is in focus. So at that point, you don't even consider like over engineering. It's kind of like when you're talking about JavaScript and something, it's at level 3. And then once it gets to level 4, I know people know about the steps to get something approved, like a new. Okay, so
and everything, yeah.
So once it's level 3, okay, that's coming up and I'm going to be reading about it, not necessarily implementing, but I'm going to, because trying to, answer Steve's question. So I don't know about actually other people, honestly. I don't, but again, if it's probably just coming right now, it's okay to at least learn about it. I don't know necessarily to implement it. And it's probably going to be a few companies like DQ, those companies that promote accessibility, they're going to say, okay, we're going to start with it. Talking about WCAG 3, that's maybe at the end of the decade, I would be cautious. But again, if like the color, because color is already very controversial because we're saying it has to be a minimum contrast. And I know so many people that they just dislike it. I know people who need low contrast and that's not an option. We don't offer that option. We offer dark mode, but that's still high contrast, just the opposite kind, so it's a good question. I'll try to keep an open eye about that because I never thought about that too much, to be honest. Hello?
Yep, still here.
Oh, okay, still there. Okay. No, I know. I'm just like in panic mode, like last week. Like I'm not seeing everyone because now. Okay. So yeah, that was. I still went like 10 minutes over. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think all this stuff is very interesting, and we're all learning a lot from you as well. Just presenting, even not the 2.2 stuff, but just the fundamentals of the 2.0, and understanding semantic HTML, understanding how beneficial it is. Because I agree with you. If you look at a lot of JavaScript projects, I bet you they're filled with divs everywhere, and that is very, very common. It's like, oh, I'm gonna build a component. I'm gonna wrap it around a div. I'm gonna build
Me,
another component. I'm gonna wrap another div.
me.
And it's like,
That's me.
it's like, wait. There's a semantic attribute that you can use to
Yeah.
help you out,
And
but
Karina,
we don't think about that.
and Karina, just to encourage you, you got to stop apologizing. This stuff is great. People are eating it up.
Yes.
People are
Yes.
asking questions. This is really, really good stuff. So thank you for this. I mean, my site I fixed with ARIA labels, and now I'm gonna go back and look at that and go, well, poop on a cracker. You know,
I gotta say the section thing you mentioned was probably the most wild thing I've learned, where you can it basically gets a region name based on it. Like that's pretty great, and that's I mean because I'm always organizing it that way for myself, but good to know that I can make it organized as well for the people using the screen readers and stuff.
I would
Yeah, just
even
be careful. Like you can add maybe one or two more other than the semantic ones. There's less than 5% of screen reader user that navigate by landmarks. That's I didn't even get to this part. So they press the D key, they would jump from header, which for them is banner, navigation, main. If there's an aside, there's a footer. You know. But the idea of having a landmark is that it's special. Yeah. So once you have too many, like let's say you have an article, and by the way, you can do the same with an article. An article, you can also create a landmark. But I know that I use section instead of divs because I can see, okay, this is a part of my article. It's not just necessarily section because like a div, it's just for styling. Okay. But if I have an article with my maybe like 6 section, I should not create a landmark for each. Like if it's just something big that holds other parts, that's when you should be using.
Yeah, I would even challenge everybody if you have a project or even a website you want to look at, browse it using a screen reader. It is so difficult. Some sites are unbrowsable with screen readers, and that's how bad it is. And some are excellent, and you can truly see the power of like using semantic HTML, using ARIA, and like how they construct things. And obviously, it's a big thing nowadays, right? With WCAG 2.2 coming, and a lot of companies getting sued for this. I had a client that I was talking to, and they're like, "Yeah, we got sued just because we weren't accessible." And we were talking, and I said, "Yeah, you might as well pay it because if you fight it, it's going to cost the same amount of money. So you just pay it, and that way you don't fight it, right?" And that's what a lot of these companies are doing. It's like we can fight it, but we don't meet the standard anyway. So we might as well just like pay it and then move on, and then make our site more accessible. And it's becoming a common thread of individuals or companies finding these sites and then filing lawsuits against them.
And it's actually, if I'm to believe a report that I've been reading, it's actually there's law firms specialize in this because you might think, oh, I'm a blind. It's usually on behalf of a blind person because that's the hardest as a screen reader user. If it's inaccessible, like they're really completely lost. So especially in New York, they specialize. So the law firms themselves scanning for sites, and then they have the screen reader user and they file the suit on behalf of them. You know what?
Yeah, part of me feels like two ways about that. Like part of it feels a little bit predatory, like it's a good thing.
Oh, it is. It is.
Questionable business practices, but
people will tell you, well, it drives accessibility, but it's not. It's working in New York. 75% of the lawsuits are in New York because they don't care that with the ADA, it has to be related to a public accommodation site. And a lot of judges are flip-flop, in the US. Some may say, well, this is not ADA because this is not a storefront. You're just a website, okay? But in New York, they don't care about that. But there's a bill in Congress where it's going to be specific about accessibility. So no judge is going to have an excuse now to say, no, this is not a lawsuit that I can look at because it's not ADA related. So that's a bill in Congress. So then that's going to be a good business to be a lawyer, like working with digital accessibility.
Awesome. Karina, great job.
Thank you.
As always, fantastic.
Oh, I was
I think-
planning myself. See?
I did the same thing before.
I think
No.
the moral of this is that companies should hire you to audit their sites. So if you're available, she is right there. Her LinkedIn is right on the screen. Definitely contact for that. But we are at the hour and a half mark ish. I wanted to kind of wrap these up within an hour 15. I don't want to keep it too long, but there's one more announcement I want to make, and that is for tomorrow. We have a design kickoff meeting from Jaina. Jaina is our first phase done, and we're going to kick off and review the tokens that she's created, some components, some screens, and whatnot. So we'll be doing that tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central Time. I will create an event and post that out. But if anybody wants to come and join us as we walk through the first part of our application, that would be fantastic.
Sweet. That's exciting.
Yeah. So other than that, I'm trying to get used to this producing and stuff like that. Other than that, thank you everyone for coming and listening to these presentations. Ryan and Corina, y'all did a fantastic job. Make sure that you send your slides to Richard and any documentations you have. That way he can compile those together. Richard is our documentation engineer again. And hopefully we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you,
Sweet
everyone.
deal. Thank you, Shashi.
Yep.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a good one, y'all.
Have a good night, all.
See you.